Well, this evening we're glad to have Joe Rigney with us, and we'll be focusing on the silver chair. I was just sharing with Joe and some of the other folks who are behind the scenes evening that having reread the silver chair, I have a new appreciation. So I'm looking forward to this evening as Joe shares with us. As those of you who've joined us before have appreciated, I know, Joe's presentations and interaction with us. And so, what we'll do this evening is Joe will start off here in a few minutes after I introduce him. And he'll start off and he'll share some insights from the Silver Chair. And this is Joe's book that he's written, Live Like a Narnian. I recommend it if you want to check out some of the insights that he'll be sharing with us this evening, and even previous insights, which I should mention also that the previous sessions are now you can access those through YouTube, I think. And so this evening, Joel will share some insights, and then we'll have a question and answer time for interaction. And we encourage you, if along the way, if you're thinking of questions you would like to ask, to put those on the question and answer in the Zoom down at the bottom. You'll see Q&A, and you just put the questions down there, and we'll get to those during the question and answer time. The chat room, you can continue to chat with each other through the chat room, but put your questions in the Q&A tab there. So as we get started, just mention that I already mentioned that Joe was an author of several books, I think probably 4 or 5 books. He's also a pastor. You're still pastoring, right? And also a professor. And you can say now, tell us a little bit about Bethlehem College and Seminary and what your position there.
Yeah, so beginning here in about 6 weeks, I will be the president of Bethlehem College and Seminary here in Minneapolis. We are a small Christian liberal arts college and theological seminary. At our college, we teach the great books in light of the greatest book for the sake of the Great Commission. So a great text focus. We'll get into some of that today, actually, some of the great text that Lewis is engaging with here in Silver Chair. But in light of the greatest book, in light of the Bible, all for the sake of the Great Commission, the mission that God has given us. And then at our seminary, we train men for ministry, pastors training pastors in exegesis, theology, biblical languages, pastoral care. And so that's our school. And it's a great privilege to have been teaching here now for about 12 years and to take over the helm of the school here in the next few weeks. And so if you're interested, you can find, I think they're going to throw the link in the chat, bcsmn.edu. We do have a preview day. If any of you are in the Twin Cities, we have a preview day next Friday here downtown at Bethlehem, as well as we're partnering with Worldview Academy for a Worldview conference for high school students. And so you can find that under the site. And that'll be a fun time. I'll be speaking there on John 6, I am the bread of life. And so that should be a really enjoyable time. So, but for now, ready to go here, Bill? Want me to take it away? All right.
Okay.
Then I'll take it away here to talk here about Silver Chair. Let me pray, and then we'll dive into the book here. Father, thank you for your grace to us. I pray for those who are coming in even now, and for those who have maybe been with us for the last three sessions. I pray this one would be especially good. I was very encouraged in reading Silver Chair again. I was edified in my soul in reading it, and I pray that some of that edification would come through for those who are joining us. So bless us, guide us, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so what I want to do is spend some time, first give a little quick overview of the Silver Chair, kind of the Cliff Notes version of the story. And then we'll focus on one big area with kind of 3 sub areas in it for the book. And then you guys be ready with your questions that we'll talk about at the end. So the basics here is Silver Chair takes place about, 50 or 60 Narnian years, I guess. It's hard to tell, something like that, after Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It's a story that continues, as we know from the last book. Now all the Pevensies have sort of had their time in Narnia, and so they don't get to come anymore. But Eustace, Clarence Scrubb, who no longer deserves his name, still maybe has a chance to come back. And so we're introduced to, we see Eustace again. We're introduced to a friend of his from school, Jill Pole, who is crying behind the gym at school at Experiment House. I'll say more about that in a minute. And she's crying because she's kind of been bullied. And Eustace comes and sits by her. They get to talking. He eventually divulges, hey, I've been to a secret country. I'd love to go back there again. You want to go? And so they ask Aslan if they can, or they're about to ask Aslan if they can come, when all of a sudden some of the bullies come looking for him and they have to run away. They make it through a door and discover that the door actually doesn't lead outside the walls of the school, but instead leads them into some other country. And they go through and they realize they are in Aslan's country. They come to the edge of a cliff, series of events there at the edge of that cliff. And Eustace actually falls over because Jill's been showing off. And he was trying to keep her from falling over the cliff. He falls over the cliff. Aslan comes out and blows him, breathes on him, and he goes flying and then walks away. And Jill's left there kind of crying and wondering what just happened to me. I thought I was just at school. And she meets Aslan, who then gives her a mission, a quest to find the lost prince, the son of Prince Caspian or King Caspian, Rillian, who has disappeared. And they need to go find the lost prince. That's her mission. That's why they were brought into Aslan's country. She's given 4 signs to help guide them along the way. And then and she's supposed to remember the signs, memorize the signs, don't forget the signs. You have to follow the signs in order to complete the mission. She's then sent to Narnia, blown to Narnia across the ocean, where she meets up with Eustace, and they immediately muff the first sign, which was to go up and greet an old friend. Eustace was to greet an old friend, and they get a lot of help on their quest. And Eustace doesn't realize that the old man getting on the boat is his old friend Caspian. And so they don't have the strong help. With the help of some owls, however, a parliament of owls, they eventually make their way north, where they team up with Puddleglum the Marshwiggle, who's a great character. We'll talk more about him. And Puddleglum's going to help them on their quest north. So if you remember in some of the other Narnian books, the first couple of books take place largely in Narnia proper. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader was a journey to the east toward the sun, and this is the journey north to the land of the giants, Ettensmoor, and the land of the north. So they travel into Ettensmoor. They have some run-ins with some giants, both some dumb, stupid giants, and then some quote-unquote gentle giants who actually end up being not so gentle. They meet the Lady of the Green Kirtle, who, of course, the reader's very suspicious of her when we meet her. The kids, not so much. And she's the one who gets them entangled with the gentle giants of Harfang. And we'll talk more about that incident as well. They eventually escape from Harfang before they're baked into man pies. They go under the giant city Ruinous, and fall down into a chasm where they meet some earthmen, some gnomes, very dull, sad-looking gnomes, who take them back to meet the Queen of Underland. While down there, they also meet Night, who they'd met earlier above in the Overland. They meet a knight who's super cheery but kind of odd and weird, and who says he's under an enchantment, and that his lady, the queen, is the one who is preserving him, and they're about to break out, and he's going to get a kingdom in Overland and all this sort of stuff. And he's enchanted, and every night he loses his mind for an hour, and that's about to happen. He invites them to stay. They stay, and of course, the reader's already knows this. The reader's already picked up on this. This is Prince Rillian under an enchantment, and he comes out, and though they've muffed the first 3 signs, the 4th sign, which was anybody who you'll know the prince because he'll be the first person to ask you to do something in Aslan's name. The prince says, in Aslan's name, let me go. And so they do, and they set him free from his enchantment. The lady comes back, tries to re-enchant them. We'll talk a lot about that scene before they eventually get into a fight with her. She turns back into a green serpent, and then they cut off the head of the serpent, and then they make their escape. They discover they've not only delivered the prince, they've delivered all of the gnomes, who actually were really great, cool characters who come from deeper down under the earth in the land of Bism. But our heroes make their way out. break through and are restored to Narnia. Rilian gets to see his dad before he dies. And then the kids are taken back, where Prince Caspian, or King Caspian now, on the other side of death, gets to go visit our world. And he and Jill and Eustace teach those bullies a lesson as the very last thing in the story. So that's kind of an overview. Now, what I want to talk about in terms of lessons and living like an Narnian here is one big category. And it's basically, how do we as Christians live and relate to modernity or the modern world? And this is something that I think almost everything Lewis writes, I think, is oriented to this question. What does it mean to be a Christian in the modern world, in the technological world, in the world in the 20th century, now the 21st century? What does it mean to live as a faithful Christian? What challenges do we face that are somewhat unique in the history of the world and that require some effort? And this book in particular, it struck me afresh in reading it this time, that this book is geared right at that particular question. So I've got kind of three elements that I'm going to talk about. There's a bunch of stuff that we could also talk about. I'll flag those and just say there's some interesting stuff here about providence, interesting stuff about prayer, interesting stuff about repenting, number of other issues like that. You can ask about those in the Q&A if you'd like. I'm going to focus on three elements. The first has to do with Experiment House. And this is something we broached in the last session on Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when we talked about the Scrub family and how they are sort of representative of what Lewis saw as the modern technocratic progressive person. They're very up to date. He calls his parents Harold and Alberta instead of mom and dad. It's very individualistic at one level because there's no familial relationships, and they're teetotalers. They have very funny clothes and all this kind of stuff. So they're modern, up to date, advanced people. In this, in Silverchair, we are introduced to Experiment House, which is the school that Eustace attends, and they don't teach French or math or Latin there very well, and they don't teach fairy tales about dragons, and they don't teach the Bible because Eustace and Jill don't even know who Adam and Eve are. Instead, they have very unusual ideas about education. One of which is that children ought to be able to do what they like. And apparently what some of the children like, some of the 10 or 15 bigger kids like to boss around all of the smaller kids. That's what kids like to do. And so the teachers here, the principals here, they don't set boundaries. They don't enforce boundaries. They kind of let kids do what they want. And so you've got lots and lots of bullying in the school. And so this is sort of the education that Lewis thinks is pretty harmful in his own day. Lewis actually talks about this sort of thing in a couple of other essays. There's one called Delinquents in the Snow. There's an essay called Delinquents in the Snow, I think is what it's called. And there's another essay called The Humanitarian Theory of Punishment, where Lewis kind of addresses this way of viewing children. Because one of the things that happens is the bullies, if you get sent to the office for being a bully, then the headmistress of the school will kind of like try to psychoanalyze you and ask you a lot of questions. And if you can figure out how to game that system, then you become one of her favorites and kind of get away with whatever you want. And so that's part of the deal. Now, at the end of the story, of course, it turns out that when the kids come back and they basically give a spanking to all of the bullies, with a Jill has a kind of a switch, and the other guys use the flats of their swords, and they give the bullies a whipping, as my Mississippi family would say, a whooping. The head sees a big lion, the wall broken down, these people coming out with swords, and she kind of loses it, calls the police. There's a lion escaped from the zoo, and when they get there, of course, the wall's put back together. Aslan's gone back to his world. There's nobody with swords anywhere. And so they think she's lost it. And so they start to look into the school, discover, hey, this school's kind of a garbage place. Like they've been allowing all the bullies. A bunch of kids get expelled. And then the great little line that Lewis has there is about how they had they make the headmistress, they say, oh, she's no good as a headmistress. Let's make her an inspector of headmistresses. So they give her a promotion, and now she gets to go evaluate other principals of schools, and she's no good at that either. And so then they give her another promotion, and they basically put her into Congress, where she lived happily ever after. And so there's something there that Lewis is trying to help us to see about the modern world and the sort of busybodies that we see in the modern world, and the way that education in particular succumbs to certain kind of ideologies and approaches that are really, really bad, and don't treat human beings the way that they should be treated, don't set boundaries, don't enforce them. And the headmistress is a good example of that. So there's that one element of kind of the modern world that Lewis sort of speaks to in this book. The other two are more significant. And so the first has to do with remembering the signs. And so remembering the signs, maybe I'll preface it by saying this. In Mere Christianity, Lewis talks about the relation between faith and reason and imagination. Okay, so the chapter on faith in that book is really significant. And what Lewis says is faith in its most basic sense is based on reason, meaning the reason you should believe in something is because it's true. That's why you believe things. You believe in things because they're true. You don't believe in things because you think they are practical. That's not a reason to believe, or courageous, or progressive, or conservative, or any dynamic or relevant. Those aren't good reasons to believe something. You believe things because they're true. Now, true things may end up being practical and relevant and courageous and all those sorts of other things, but that shouldn't be the foundation of your belief. And he actually writes about this in Screwtape Letters. One of the things Screwtape wants to do to humans is get them to think of whether they should embrace something because it's progressive or conservative, or because of whether it's courageous or cowardly, academic or practical, useful or dynamic. All of those sort of buzzwords, get them to base their beliefs on those kind of criteria, evaluate beliefs on those criteria, not based on whether it's true or false. Lewis rejects that whole way of thinking and says, look, if it's true, you should believe it, and if it's false, you shouldn't, period. So faith is based on reason because the world's objective and real, and so we need to base our beliefs on that. Now, how then does imagination play into that? Well, in Lewis's mind, the battle in the Christian life is often to hold on to the beliefs that we've embraced based on reason. Like, we think they're good reasons to believe in God, good reasons to believe in Jesus, but holding on to that belief in the face of our emotions, in the face of our imaginations, that's the hard thing. Okay, and so in Mere Christianity, you read here this section. He says this: I was assuming that if the human mind once accepts a thing as true, it will automatically go on regarding it as true until some real reason for considering it turns up. I was assuming the human mind is completely ruled by reason, but it's not. Okay, and we know this. He gives examples like, that he talks about anesthetics when they put the little thing over your mouth when you're going to surgery. He says, I know they're going to knock me out and they're not going to cut into me until I'm asleep. But in that moment, I panic and I think, oh no, they're going to forget and it's not going to work and they're going to cut me open with no anesthesia. And so you kind of freak out, right? And so the battle there, he says, is between faith and reason on the one hand. I know that they're not going to do that. And then emotion and imagination on the other. I'm going to be suffocated or this isn't going to work. And he says that happens a lot of different times throughout our lives when, he talks about a man knows on perfectly good evidence that a pretty girl of his acquaintance is a liar and doesn't tell the truth. But when he gets around her and she says, no, this time I'm telling the truth, he believes it because she's a pretty girl. And so his emotions there are overruling his reason. Now, here's the point. That's true of our belief in Christianity and the gospel as well. He says, suppose once a man's reason decides that the weight of evidence is for the Christian faith. Here's what's going to happen, Lewis says. There will come a moment when there's bad news or he's in trouble or he's living among a lot of other people who don't believe it. And all at once, his emotions will rise up and carry out a sort of blitz on his belief. And the emotions will rise up and say, boy, it'd be great if this wasn't true. Or there'll come a moment when he wants a woman or wants to tell a lie or feels very pleased with himself or sees to make a chance to make some money in an unethical way. And boy, it would be really convenient if Christianity weren't not true. And once again, his wishes, his desires will carry out a blitz. And so in this moment, like our moods are sort of settling in and making it feel like maybe Christianity is not true. Maybe it's not true. And what Lewis says is faith, in the sense in which I'm using the word, is the art of holding on to things that your reason has once accepted in spite of your changing moods. I'm just going to say this is one of the more profound things I think in the last 2 years that I've seen in Lewis is faith is holding on to the things that you've believed in spite of your changing moods, because moods are going to change. Whatever your reason says, moods are going to change. And he talks about when I was an atheist, I would have kind of Christian moods. And when I'm a Christian, I sometimes have atheist moods. And it's not really based on new evidence. It's based on kind of like a feeling or an emotion or a mood. The rebellion of your moods against your real self is going to come. And faith means teaching your moods where they get off. Teaching your moods, hey, that's just a mood, and not dithering to and fro with beliefs really depending upon weather or the state of your digestion or what sort of happened in the world lately, all that sort of stuff. Instead of like your moods are shaped by all sorts of things that don't have anything to do with reality, with evidence, with reason. And you've got to, your faith says, listen here, mood, I'm not going to listen to you. Okay. You have to be trained in the habit of faith. So the first step to do that is recognize the fact that your moods change. And then he goes on to talk about it. Now, I set all that up. What does that have to do with Silverchair? That's what the remember the signs thing is all about. So in the story, Jill is given a mission, and she's told, here's your quest. You need to go find the lost prince. And where am I here? And Aslan gives them signs to guide them, okay? Greet the old friend when you see him, travel north to the ruined city, do what the writing on the stone in the ruined city says, and then you'll recognize the prince because he'll say in the name of Aslan. And then here's what Aslan says: remember the signs, say them to yourself when you wake in the morning and when you lie down at night and when you wake in the middle of the night. And whatever strange things may happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. And so that's an echo of Deuteronomy 6:7, where God tells Israel, write these words of the law on your frontlets, put them on your doorpost, say that, meditate on them day and night, same in the morning, same in the night, teach them to your children. Remember the word. So remember the signs is meant to help us, is an echo of Deuteronomy 6 and the need to meditate on the word. And the reason is because Aslan says on the mountain in his country, the air is clear and your mind is clear. But as you drop down into Narnia, as you go into the real world, the air is going to thicken and the air will confuse your mind. And the signs, what you've seen in the clarity, won't look the way you think that they were supposed to look. And so it's important to know them by heart and pay no attention to appearances. Like, bank on the signs, trust the signs, remember the signs. Remember the signs, believe the signs. Nothing else matters. That's what Aslan says to Jill. That's nothing else. And so then they go down and then they face a lot of hardships on their journey. Okay. So when they meet up with Puddleglum, she does this for a while. Every morning, every night, she's repeating the signs, memorizing the signs. She's got the signs down. They meet Puddleglum. They're heading on their journey up through the giant country. And here's what starts to happen. They grow tired. They get cold. They get sick of the wind and the rain and the hard ground. And they really want like some comfort and some warmth. And so it gets hard, and it gets hard to kind of like remember to do your devotions, right? Remember to repeat the signs to yourself over and over again. And then in the middle of one of these low spots, what Screwtape in Screwtape Letters calls a trough, in the middle of one of those, they meet the Lady of the Green Kirtle, who we know eventually is the Green Witch. And she says, oh, good news. Up ahead, there's the castle of the gentle giants of Harfang, and there's all kinds of warmth and wealth. They have feasts. They have all kinds of food. It's great. They'll welcome you in. Make sure you get there. Knock on the door. Run up. Don't get left outside. Steaming hot baths, soft beds, bright hearths. All of these sort of things are just ahead if you'll do it. And Puddleglum tries to say, "Hey, I don't know anything about." The signs didn't say anything about staying with gentle giants. The signs said look for a city and do what the stone on the city says. Didn't say anything about staying with gentle giants. But Jill and Eustace become fixated on the hot meals and the warm rooms that the lady promises in Harfang. Now here's the thing about that. Okay, this is one of the dangers of the modern world. This is the danger of worldliness. Okay, the danger of worldliness, the tendency to see this world as our home, to see the hardships of this world as things to be avoided at all costs, and to try to surround ourselves with comforts. And Lewis is saying that kind of worldliness, just like Jesus says, can choke out the seed of the word, right? Remember the parable of the soils, right? You have the soil that's thrown on the rocky ground, where the birds eat it up. The soil on the rocky ground, which rises up, persecution comes and it withers. And then the seed, this is particular right here, the seed that's thrown among the thorns. And the thorns grow up and they choke out the life. And Jesus, when he explains the parable, says that's the cares of this world, the desire for riches, the desire for ease. That's what chokes out the life of the world, of the word, and prevents us from maturing and growing in faith. And so that's what we see here with the lady of the green kirtle. She's a demonic figure. She's a witch, and she tempts them with worldliness, with the promise of baths and food. And so that's one element. And what it is here's a mood. Right? Here's your emotions. Here's your desires and your imagination. Oh, if only I could get to that warm bath, then everything would be fine. And because of that, Jill forgets the signs. She starts to forget about the signs. So here's what Lewis says in Sword Chair. Whatever the lady had intended by telling them about Harfang, the actual effect on the children was a bad one. Now we find out, of course, the lady did intend that. They could think about nothing but beds and baths and hot meals and how lovely it would be to get indoors. They never talked about Aslan or even about the lost prince now. In other words, they're not thinking about God. They're not thinking about their mission. Why are they here? What are they doing? And Jill gave up her habit of repeating the signs over to herself every night and morning. She said to herself at first that she was too tired, but she soon forgot all about it. And this is interesting, and though you might have expected that the idea of having a good time at Harfang would have made them more cheerful, it really made them more sorry for themselves and more grumpy and snappy with each other and with Puddleglum. Okay, and so here's the deal. Aslan's given them a mission and signs to accomplish it, just like God's given Christians a mission, and the scriptures are our guide in accomplishing the mission. And in our best moments, when our heads are clear, we embrace the mission and we clearly see what we're here for. But we don't always live in the clear mountain air of Aslan's country. Inevitably, we come down from the mountain and the journey gets hard. There's low times, there's troughs, there's opportunities for certain types of temptations. And even in the story early on, when they're in Cair Paravel, when they first get there, Jill forgets about the signs during all of the feasting and storytelling. And she just totally forgets about the mission. And then all of a sudden she goes, oh, whoa, I forgot about the mission. And so in this case, again, the lady's temptation appeals to their imagination. Warm beds, full bellies, just around the corner. And that desire, fueled by that image of comfort, carries out a blitz. And it takes them off mission, and it makes them grumpy. And so because having lost sight of their sort of Aslan-given mission, having lost sight of their quest, they also lose sight of the basic kindness and decency that they should have toward one another. Because they're not rightly oriented to God, they can't be rightly oriented to each other. And so this means that repeating the signs is necessary in order for them to stay on mission. Okay, and Lewis says this here's how he finishes in Mere Christianity when he's talking about the moods and the way that our moods can sort of affect our beliefs. So first, we need to recognize your moods can change. Sometimes, oh, this is great. I'm in a good mood, and it's easy to believe that God is real and he loves me and that Christ is risen from the dead. It's easy to believe that. Other times, our moods are going to be different. Things are going to be hard, and our imaginations carry out a blitz. Then he says, so remember, your moods are going to change. Second, the next is to make sure that if once you've accepted Christianity, then some of its main doctrines shall be deliberately held before your mind for some time every day. That is why daily prayers and religious readings and church going are necessary parts of the Christian life. We have to be continually reminded of what we believe. Neither this belief nor any other will automatically remain alive in the mind. It must be fed. And as a matter of fact, if you examined 100 people who had lost their faith in Christianity, I wonder how many of them would turn out to have been reasoned out of it by honest argument. Do not most people simply drift away? There it is, right? That Lewis is teaching us in Narnia through Remember the Signs, teaching children and teaching us as adults to remember the signs, to put our faces in our Bibles day by day by day, to get on our knees and pray and ask God, help me to remember your signs, help me to remember the word, to meditate on it, and to bring before my mind and my attention what reality really is, what I've been persuaded is true and good and right in the world, lest I be drawn away from it by hardship Oh, bother the signs. Jill said, at one point, Jill says, bother the signs. And she says this because she knew that so actually, one of the interesting things is when Puddleglum, they're, let's see, where are we at here? There we go. When they're almost to Harfang, it gets really, really cold. There's a sharp wind blowing. It starts to snow. They can see Harfang in the distance, and Jill and Eustace are just locked in, whereas Puddleglum's like, I still don't think this is a good idea to go hang out with gentle giants. Never heard of gentle giants before. And as they're sort of trudging through the snow and they're just trying to get to the warm baths and the full bellies, Puddleglum says, are you still sure those signs, Paul? What are we supposed to be looking for right now? And the answer to that question is, we should be looking for the giant city. We're looking for the giant city. But Jill says this, oh, come on, bother the signs. Something about someone mentioning Aslan's name, I think, but I'm jolly well not going to give a recitation here. As you see, she'd got the order wrong. That was because she had given up saying the signs over every night. She still really knew them if she troubled to think, like she could recall them, but she was no longer so pat in her lesson as to be sure of reeling them off in the right order at a moment's notice, and without thinking. Puddleglum's question annoyed her because deep down inside her, she was already annoyed with herself for not knowing the lion's lesson quite so well as she felt she ought to have known it. This annoyance, added to the misery of being very cold and tired, made her say, bother the signs. She didn't perhaps quite mean it. So there's Lewis being very generous, and rightly so, to Jill, who's bothered the signs. I'm tired. I'm done with this. I probably remember, but I don't even care. That sort of attitude is what happens when we fail to bring before our minds day by day by day what it is that we believe. Otherwise we drift off. And of course, Puddleglum is the one who's sort of looking around as they're almost to the giant city, to the Harfang, and he's going, this place kind of looks funny. I think maybe we should think about this for a minute. And of course, they end up like marching through all of the letters that say under me, which is what's written on the giant city to tell them where to go. They're literally walking through the letters and they can't see it. Why can't they see it? Because they're off mission. They're attracted to the worldly comforts. They're desiring and craving the comforts of this world. And therefore they don't remember the signs and they don't know what to look for. So this is a really brilliant thing. And so I'd encourage you, if you go back through the book, really pay attention to the ways about the signs and about the need to memorize them, about the way that remembering the signs relates to them treating each other rightly, like we're on the same team, on the same mission versus squabbling and fighting with one another. All of those things are really, really well done. And there's lots of little details that Lewis drops in about that and the danger of worldliness. Now, the other main element here, so we got Experiment House as sort of a representation of the modern progressive vision of education. We've got remembering the signs as a way of avoiding worldliness, which is a very great temptation in the modern world. And then the last one has to do with enchantments. One of the things that's really fascinating about this book is the nature of the enchantments. Here's one of the things that Lewis is doing. I think we talked about this in our very first session on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You remember when Lucy or the professor is talking about Lucy insisting that she got into a magic country, and the professor says, look, there's three possibilities. Either she's a liar, or she's crazy, or she's telling the truth. You know she doesn't tell lies. It's obvious she's not crazy, and so then she's telling the truth. And of course, we talked about the fact that is a version of liar, lunatic, or Lord. It's just liar, lunatic, or telling the truth. And so what Lewis is doing in that is he's priming the pump. He's tilling the ground for children and for us, so that our habits of our mind are trained in Narnia to recognize real temptations and real arguments that we'll encounter in the world. So if you learn, there's three options when someone's making a claim: either they're telling you a lie, or they're crazy or mistaken, or they're telling the truth. And that's how you should evaluate the claims of Christ. Either he's a liar, he's a devil. Either he's crazy, a lunatic, which doesn't seem right given how sane he appears in his ethical teaching and so forth, or he really is the Son of God. So he's preparing us for that in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Here, he's got another element in mind. And to understand it, you really need to see that Lewis viewed the modern world as a kind of enchantment, that we've been subject to enchantment. So as they're when they meet the lady of the green kirtle, they eventually come into her kingdom, captured by the gnomes. Significantly, this is the thing I noticed this time about the gnomes, is how sad they are and busy they are, right? So they're very dull, low, sad, and they just, many fall down to the underland, and few return to the sunlit lands, right? That's the repeated refrain. Many fall down, few return to the sunlit lands. And there's sort of this idea that they're kind of sunk down, sad, dull, in a stupor. And there's a line where it says, Jill said everybody was very busy, but she never could figure out exactly what they were doing. And when I read it this time, I thought, man, what a great description of the modern world, right? How busy everybody is, how we kind of go around just doing stuff, and it's very busy. But what's it for? What's the purpose? Why are we doing this? And of course, we find out later, they're under an enchantment. They're under the witch's enchantment. Of course, when we meet Prince Rillian, we find out that he too is under an enchantment. And let's see. And yet he also is kind of very silly. Like he's very, he laughs really weird. When he acts, I don't even know what you're talking about. They all kind of feel really awkward around him. He's never heard of Prince Rillian. He's enamored. He's like, my lady is the greatest lady ever. And whenever he's telling his story, he says this, I don't remember how I got into this dark world. I don't remember how I came here. I don't remember any time before the queen, but my thought is that she saved me from some evil enchantment and brought me hither of her exceeding bounty. And I think what Lewis is suggesting here is this is sort of the story that the Enlightenment liked to tell itself, right? That there was this long ages of darkness, and then enlightenment came, and all of a sudden we knew we don't need God. The modern world loves to sort of throw off the shackles of religion, of faith, and say we don't need God anymore. And so the prince, under the influence of this enchantment, thinks, I've been delivered. My lady must have delivered me. And in fact, I still kind of have moments where every night there's an hour where I'm out of my mind. Now, of course, that's the hour he's actually in his right mind. Reality keeps sort of shoving its way through, even to Prince Rillian. But he thinks of it under the influence of the enchantment. He thinks that's when I'm out of my mind, when he was actually in his right mind, right? So he's under the influence of the enchantment, and totally gets it wrong. And then the promise that he's given from the lady is that she's going to take him and make him a king in Overland. They're going to rise up and overthrow some people upstairs. And we see the prince being really patronizing when Jill says, I think you're going to be a wicked tyrant. And then he says, what? Said the knight, still laughing and patting her head in a quite infuriating fashion. He's very patronizing, which again is one of the marks of sort of the modern world and sort of the Enlightenment that we think we've come into. Is it sort of looks down its nose at people who believe, people who still believe in overlands, people who have old-fashioned ideas about right and wrong, good and evil, male and female. People have those days, oh, you silly idiot, you still believe all of that nonsense, right? You still believe someone rose from the dead. And so this is what the patronizing, laughing prince, under the influence of the spell, is doing. Then, of course, the prince, Puddleglum feels like he has a sense there's danger here, there's enchantment, there's magic, there's treason. I smell it, it's in the air. Let's keep a watch. And then they decide to stay with the prince when he's going to have his fit. Okay, and so there's a really significant moment in that where they say this, where the three heroes say, whatever he says, we're not going to let him loose, because under the enchantment he says, don't let me loose. Whatever I say, don't let me loose. And they all agree, there's nothing in the world he can say or do that'll make me change my mind, right? We're not doing it. And they make this promise. And of course, this is a key moment. And so then, of course, the prince starts coming out. He says, I'm in my right mind. Please let me free. You have hearts of stone. I've suffered. Please, you can save me. She's gone. This is my one chance. Please let me out. And he starts threatening them. I will kill you if you don't let me out. and they're steady, don't give in. And then all of a sudden the prince says, by all fears and all loves, by the bright skies of Overland, by the great Aslan, by the lion himself, I charge you. And then they go, oh no, what do we do? And then there's this question, right? So on the one hand, what had been the use of promising one another that they wouldn't set the knight free if they were going to do it just because he mentioned the name of Aslan? On the other hand, what was the point of learning the signs? You'll know the prince if he does. He'll be the first person to ask you to do something in my name. Here it is. What's the point of learning the sign if they weren't going to obey them? But could Aslan really have meant them to unbind this lunatic because he asked in his name? Could it be a mere accident? Or what if the queen knew all about the signs and they made the knight learn this name? Oh no, what do we do? There's this back and forth, and it could be this and it could be that, and they have to make a choice and they have to take a risk. Puddleglum's the one who gets him through. He says, if only we knew, Jill says. Oh, we do know. You mean everything's going to come all right if we let him go? I don't know about that, Puddleglum says. Aslan didn't tell Pole what would happen. He only told her what to do. This fellow will be the death of us once he's up, I shouldn't wonder, but that doesn't let us off following the sign. In other words, obey regardless. The question is not try to calculate what the results will be. The issue is remember the signs, follow the signs. Now, of course, they do. They set the prince free. He breaks the silver chair, and they're about to escape when all of a sudden the queen walks in. And this is really a significant moment. She immediately comes in, surveys the scene, walks over to the side, opens up a little box, pulls out some green powder, throws it in the fire, and significantly, and then begins to strum on an instrument while she has a conversation. And this is really, really important in the story because all through the conversation which followed, the smell grew stronger and stronger and filled the room and made it harder to think. And then she took out a musical instrument and she began to play it with her fingers, a steady, monotonous thrumming that you didn't notice after a few minutes. The less you noticed it, the more it got into your brain and your blood. This made it hard to think. And she had thrummed for a time, and the sweet smell was now strong. She began speaking in a sweet, quiet voice, and she begins asking them questions about what they just said. What's Narnia? There's no land called Narnia. And then Puddleglum's, yeah, I live there. Oh, where is it? And he goes, up there. And what Lewis is doing here, it's sort of like, oh, you believe in God? You believe in heaven? Where's heaven? Up there. You think God is like in the sky? There's a story Lewis tells one time about when the Russian cosmonauts went into space for the first time, and they went up there and they came back and they said, we know that God doesn't exist because we went up and looked, as though sort of going up into outer space proves that there's no God, right? And that's sort of that's a modern pretension. It's a patronizing way of thinking about religion. And so, there's no overworld, she says. I've never been there. We've never met. This is just your imagination. This is just your fancy. You're just playing a game. And so she keeps sort of, the magic becomes in its full strength. And the more enchanted you get, the more you feel that you're not enchanted at all. So the more that she strums, the more that the smell seeps into your brain and your everything, the more that you begin to think, I'm not enchanted at all. You don't feel the enchantment anymore. And so she keeps saying, there never was such a world. The Narnia is fake. It's no good. And then Puddleglum says, you won't make me forget Narnia. I was there once. I've seen the sky full of stars. I've seen the sun. And he rouses everybody with, I've seen the sun. And she just keeps playing. And she says, what's the sun? And when they describe it, it's like a lamp, but hung in the sky. Hung from what? And they kind of think about that for a second. She says, see, here's the deal. You just took my lamp and you blew it up and you made it into a sun. And then they oh, you're right, there's no sun. And they fall back into the enchantment again. And then she says, they say, Jill musters up the courage, says, there's Aslan. Ooh, who's Aslan? He's a lion. What's a lion? A lion's like a big cat with a mane, but not like a horse's mane, more like a judge's wig. And it's terrifically strong. Oh, here's the deal. You've seen lamps. You imagined a bigger and better lamp. You called it a sun. You've seen cats. You imagined a bigger and better cat. You called it a lion. This is just make-believe, okay? There's nothing in that world that's not copied from the real world, this world of mine, which is the only world. This is all there is, nothing beyond it. And you should be ashamed of this, Prince. Put away the childish tricks. There's no Narnia, no overworld, no sky, no sun, no Aslan. Everybody go to sleep and sleep without these foolish dreams. And they're falling asleep. And then Puddleglum's going to save the day. Now, the important thing at this point is that what Lewis is doing here is he's dramatizing or showing the enchantments of the modern world that men like Ludwig Feuerbach and Sigmund Freud have sort of introduced, in which they basically say, look, when we're kids, we need our fathers, and we love our fathers, and our fathers protect us. We grow up, we realize, man, our fathers aren't as all powerful as we thought, and we still have a psychological need for a parent. And so we project father into the sky and say there's a God who protects us. And the whole notion is so that's the pattern, right? Is that there's a psychological need. We project that need into the sky to have it met. And then the debunkers come along, the modern debunkers come along, and they try to explain away the origins of that belief. And then they can dismiss it and they don't have to deal with it anymore. And that's what the witch is doing. There's no sun. You just projected lamp into the sky. There's no Aslan. There's no lion. You just made a big cat. There's no God. You just projected your father into the sky. That's what Lewis has worked into his story. Because if you're going to write a children's story, why not work in 19th century German philosophers? If I'm going to write a children's story, I suppose that's what I'm going to do too. So that's the modern lies. That's the deception. That's what Lewis calls an enchantment that's in play here. And so then how do they get out of it? Well, this is where Puddleglum comes into play. Puddleglum comes over, sticks his foot in the fire. That's important. Smell of burnt marsh wiggle fills the room. She yells at him, and he says, "Hold on, I got something to say. One word, ma'am, one word. All you've been saying is quite right. I shouldn't wonder. I'm a chap who always likes to know the worst and then put the best face on I can on it. I won't deny any of what you said. There's one more thing to be said, even so. Suppose we've only dreamed of Overland. Then it seems to me that where you go? There it is. Seems to me. Hold on, sorry, I had to pull something up here. There we go. Suppose we've only made these things up: trees and grass and sun and moon and stars and Aslan. Suppose we have. All I can say is that in that case, the made-up things seem a good deal more important than the real ones. Suppose this black pit of a kingdom is the only world. It strikes me as a pretty poor one. That's a funny thing when you come to think of it. We're just babies making up a game, if you're right. But 4 babies playing a game can make a play world, which licks your real world hollow. And that's why I'm going to stand by the play world. I'm on Aslan's side, even if there isn't any Aslan to lead it. I'm going to live as like a Narnian as I can, even if there isn't any Narnia. Thanking you kindly for our supper. If these 2 gentlemen and the young lady are ready, we're leaving your court at once, and we're setting out in the dark to spend our lives looking for Overland. Not that our lives will be very long, I should not think, but that's small loss if the world is as dull a place as you say. So a couple of things worth noting there. The first is that this is an actual argument. The argument is it's a version of Lewis's argument from Desire. And the argument from Desire basically says this. It says, if we discover in ourselves a desire for something that nothing in this world can satisfy, then we must begin to think we were made for another world. Okay, so if a baby feels hunger, there's such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, there's such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire, well, there's such a thing as sex. And so if we have a desire for something more, that's a pointer to its reality. And so again, this is Lewis's argument from Desire. It would be a really strange thing if we had this desire which nothing could satisfy ever. And so it's a pointer to God. And so that's Puddleglum's argument. In a world of darkness, then the desire for a son is really strange. In a world that only has kittens, the desire for a lion is strange. And then the idea that children, stupid little childish children, would be the ones to invent it, and it would be even better than the real world, that's stranger even still. And so that's the first aspect of the response. The second is the role of pain. It's important that pain is the reason, that suffering is part of what produces the clarity of thought to see this. Lewis wrote in one place, "We can ignore pleasure. Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers up to us in our pleasures, speaks to us in our conscience, but shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. And then, and the whole notion here is, is this just a leap in the dark? You're probably right, you're probably right. There is no Aslan, but I'm on Aslan's side. Is this just a blind leap in the dark? And the answer is no, because Puddleglum is from Narnia. He's seen the sun. He's lived there. This is him, again, going back to what we said before, like faith. This is him clinging to faith, holding on to what he's believed and what he's known in the face of enchantments, emotions, imagination, the blitz, in the face of those changing moods and the sinking feeling of the lies of modernity. Here's Puddleglum clinging to the faith and not letting it go. And so this isn't a blind leap. This is a deep commitment to what he knows to be true. And it beautifully demonstrates what Lewis has been trying to show. So there's enough there for now. Maybe we'll take some questions.
Well, thank you, Joe. You gave us plenty to consider there, and we do have a couple of questions. And I encourage you folks again to post questions on the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. So the first question is someone asks, David says, C.S. Lewis is popular with us evangelicals. How do we know when to be wary of him?
When he doesn't say what the Bible says. So obviously, like any author, you're going to want to weigh Lewis by the scriptures. That's always going to be an important thing to do. Any author, you want to weigh him by the scriptures. And so there's places where I think Lewis gets things wrong. And they tend to be on more peripheral things, generally speaking. So I'd say you're going to be good Bereans. You're going to test what he says by the scriptures. I also think it's good to note that oftentimes in many places, Lewis is he's making the historic Christian faith accessible. Like if basically, here's an example. If you read Mere Christianity and the whole argument from morality at the beginning of Mere Christianity, everybody wants fair play, that sort of thing. At that point, he's basically just channeling Richard Hooker, the famous Anglican theologian, on the law of nature, of natural law. He's just that. All that is. I teach Richard Hooker in my classes, and it's just literally that's all Lewis is doing. He's just making it accessible to laymen. There's places in Letters to Malcolm where he's doing the same thing with classical theology, and so he's oftentimes just making accessible the broader Christian tradition. Now, there's a few places where he is somewhat unique and may not be right, and so that's just good Bible studies. Remember the signs. I'd say remember the signs. Remember the signs. Remember the signs. Lewis is a guide, but he's not the signs. And so you're always going to want to test it by the scriptures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll just say that you mentioned a couple of those in your book on Lewis. Remind me the exact title.
Live Like a Narnian?
No, the Christian C.S. Lewis on the Christian Life. Lewis on the Christian Life, Becoming Truly Human in the Presence of God. Yeah, in that book, I talk about purgatory, which Lewis believed in, and I think wasn't quite right. His way of approaching biblical authority is a little bit off. There's a few places where I kind of take issue with him, but in all of them, I think he's onto something, and it's a minor. In my mind, it's often a minor thing. In Live Like a Narnian, I talk about the whole Emeth thing, the inclusivism, the idea that you don't have to have conscious faith in Jesus, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, when we get to the last battle. Yeah. Okay, so another question from Steve. You've mentioned that remembering the signs is a reference to Deuteronomy. Are there other connections to the Old Testament? It appears the journey north could be similar to Israel's journey in salvation history. They frequently lose their way, but through God's providence, course corrections are provided.
I don't know about any particular Old Testament ones. I think that's a good connection. I think part of the I've mentioned in previous sessions about the connections to the medieval planets, Michael Ward's thesis about that, and I think part of the wandering could both connect to sort of Israel there as remembering the signs in your wanderings. I think that's good.
Mhm.
But it's also, this is the lunar story. This is the story, the moon, and the moon produces lunatics, right? That's what that's where we get the term lunatic, is it's someone under the influence of the moon. The moon is always changing. And so your wits wander, right? You're out of your mind. And the word lunatic shows up a couple of different times in the book. The prince is a lunatic. The headmistress is a lunatic at the end. And so the fact that they're wandering and sort of out of their mind, the enchantment sort of idea, I think is part of the moon sort of stuff. There are a couple of other biblical elements though. At the beginning, when Jill, there is no other stream when she's thirsty, and Aslan's sitting there, and she says, I'm dying of thirst. Well, then come and drink. Are you going to eat me? No. Well, then I guess I'll have to go someplace else. I'll find another stream. There is no other stream. Obviously, there's just really thick there with sort of Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the living water. That's really thick. And there's no promises. Like, this is one of the things Lewis wants to, beat into us over and over and over again is if you think, if I trust in Jesus, everything's going to go really great for me. He's like, no, that's not the thing. In the end, it will be good, but it may be really hard in the meantime. And there's no promises of ease and comfort in the meantime.
Mm-hmm. That's why the words are so important to keep in mind.
Yes.
I also thought of I don't know that Lewis had this in mind, but if you think of just kind of temptation in general, David, when the story of David and Bathsheba, it starts off when the kings go out to war. David is up on the top of the palace there, and he sees Bathsheba, and so this is he should be out
on mission
doing other things, and
right.
Yet ease and comfort are
the beginning of the downfall.
Place of temptation.
Yep. That's good.
Same with Samson. You could pull some similar things with Samson.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So did Lewis read Flannery O'Connor or vice versa?
I don't know the answer to that. I doubt he read Flannery O'Connor. I think that just time-wise, she's later, so a little bit. And I don't know that he would have been up to date on like American short stories. Yeah. So I doubt he read Flannery O'Connor. It's possible she read him, but I'm sure somebody's done a study on that. I just don't know.
Okay, so next question by Dave. Dave asks, the silver chair was somewhat insignificant in the story. Why should the story be named the silver chair?
Good. So this is part of that lunar thing that I was mentioning about how the story is shaped around the moon. One of my colleagues here actually at Bethlehem College and Seminary took a class from Michael Ward, who has the thesis that each of the chronicles, each story corresponds to one of the 7 planets of the medieval heavens. So the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is Jupiter. Prince Caspian is Mars. Voyage of the Dawn Treader is the sun. It's a journey towards the sun. There's lots of imagery and different things like that. Well, this is the lunar story, the story about the moon. And my colleague, Betsy Howard, wrote for her paper for that class, made the connection between, that's the book right there. Yeah, Bill's holding it up. Made the connection between the moon and the silver chair based on a poem by Ben Jonson, who was a contemporary of Shakespeare. And the poem's called The Queen and Huntress, and it's about the moon. Queen and huntress, chaste and fair, now the sun is laid to sleep. Seated in thy silver chair, state and wonted manner keep. Hesperus entreats thy light, goddess excellently bright. And it goes on from there. So, but the notion that the moon is a silver chair, sits in the silver chair, is part of the signet. That's why is it a silver chair? Because this is the moon story. And so Lewis is connecting his love of medieval and Renaissance literature, that's Ben Jonson, and the medieval planets and all of that sort of stuff to the silver chair. And so that's why there's wandering of wits. That's why it's very pale. Like when you think about what Ettinsmoor, the giant land, kind of looks like, it's very craggy and lots of very bare and sparse, like the moon. And there's a number of other connections that Ward makes to the lunar story. So that's why it's called the silver chair.
Okay. Why did Lewis choose to make Puddleglum, such a somber character? Is there a correlation between being somber and being faithful, steady? Would Puddleglum's character have been less effective if it had been he had been portrayed otherwise?
Yeah. So Puddleglum is one of everybody loves Puddleglum, and Puddleglum in particular is modeled after Lewis's gardener, the gardener at the kilns. So he's based on a real human being named Fred Paxford. And the sort of basics there with Puddleglum are he's outwardly very pessimistic, right? But inwardly he's just a rock solid guy, right? And this is the gardener, the unmarried gardener at the kilns where Lewis lived, named Fred Paxford, and that's where Puddleglum came from. And there's a great little story. I read this a couple months ago I think it's called C.S. Lewis at Poets Corner, and it's basically a series of remembrances by people who knew Lewis, like just reflecting on different interactions. And this one's from Walter Hooper, I think. So I'll read it here. This is from Hooper talking about Lewis telling him that Puddleglum was modeled on Fred Paxford. I was later to notice many resemblances between Paxford and Puddleglum, but the best resemblance was supplied by Lewis. So Joy, Lewis's wife, had a long time ambition to visit Greece. And so in 1960, he decided to risk. Lewis said, let's go to Greece, and they're going to fly there. Okay. And so they're going to, and then flights are new. This is the 60s, right? This isn't like everybody's flying. This is the first time they're going to fly. First time they're going to fly. And Paxford was always listening to the radio. And so the taxi pulls up to get Lewis and their friends and take them to the airport to the flight to Greece. And so they're in the car, and Paxford comes out to wish them well. And he puts his head in the car window and he says, I was just listening to the wireless, Mr. Jack, and this bloke said an airplane just went down. Everybody killed, burnt beyond recognition. Did you hear that, Mr. Jack? Burnt beyond recognition. Have a good flight. And then off they go. And you just go, that's Puddleglum, right? Like here's just this. Why would really? I'm about to go get on a plane. My imagination's about to carry out, blitz on my reason. It's safe. It's safe. It's safe. And Paxford comes out and does worst case scenario sort of stuff. And so that's Puddleglum. So that's where Puddleglum's coming from. And the thing about it is that Paxford was like Puddleglum because he was outwardly pessimistic, but inwardly optimistic and resilient. And so he didn't often go to church, but he was always singing hymns, sometimes very loud, so he couldn't be quieted down. And when somebody asked him, there's a good story here that Hooper tells where when somebody would ask Paxford why he never got married, he would always quote this little poem where he said, a little puff of powder, a little touch of paint makes a woman look just like what she ain't. And so there's just kind of a little witticism to this guy that was really great. And Lewis wanted to capture him there. I do think he thinks of Puddleglum as, on the one hand, when things are good, he's always the wet blanket. But when things are bad, man, you're never going to find a truer friend who's going to sort of stay the course and not going to deviate. He's going to do what's required. He's going to follow the signs, no matter what. You won't find a truer friend and courageous companion than Puddleglum. And yet, of course, he's going to be like, yeah, it's probably going to rain. This is probably going to make you sick. We're all going to die like that. The plane's going to crash. That's going to happen if you're with Puddleglum. But man, if you're in a witch's, castle and there's an enchantment being put on you, who do you want with you? It's Puddleglum.
Yes, his philosophy is kind of, if you expect bad things to happen, then you're prepared when they do.
That's right.
If good things happen, then you kind of are surprised or whatever. So
that's right.
I've known people like that. In fact, I've been accused of being that way before. Anyway, okay. So can you speak to how Lewis could write something so compelling to children and adults, and yet be so loaded with theology or theological themes? Did Lewis speak much on his writing process?
He didn't. I don't think he spoke. He's got a couple of essays where he says on 3 ways of writing for children, where he talks about writing fairy stories in terms of like weaving in. And in one of those, he does talk about how the images came first. It all began with an image, and then after the image, and like, hey, I'd like to write a fairy story about a fawn. He says there's the artist, I think, and then the man. And the man is the one who comes along and says, what sort of things do I want to work into the story? But it always starts with the story, and then the other stuff sort of gets worked in. So that's significant. That he does talk about that on 3 Ways of Writing for Children, and it all began with an image. I think those are the 2 main ones. Those essays are in the little collection called On Stories is the name of the book, collection of essays. The reason he's able to do this is because he'd read lots of books. I mean, Lewis he had just read so much. So I'll put in a little plug here for Bethlehem College and Seminary, right? Like, how was Lewis able to do what he did? Well, he had an education that just required him to soak in great literature and imbibe it, and he loved it, and he learned how did Spenser and Shakespeare and Austen, how did they do it? And he loved that, and therefore he wanted to recreate it. How did George MacDonald write? And then he had a theological education, right, and a philosophical one. So he was a philosopher and studied theology, even as a layman, and therefore was able to bring together sort of a rich, deep theological vision of God and the Christian life, and this sort of real creative, romantic, literary capacity. And so this is why he's such a fun guy to read, I think, is because you get the same sort of truths in multiple different forms. You can get it in an essay, you can get it in a book, you can get it in fiction, you can get it in poetry, and it's all there. You can just see the connections between them. And I find, for me, it helps it to stick. Like the thing in Mere Christianity about, your moods are going to rise up and carry out a blitz, and so you got to cling to the truth. Like, that's just a great way to put it. That'll preach, right? But then when you see it sort of worked out in Remember the Signs, when you see it worked out in Puddleglum, in the Green Witch's Castle, when you see it in the story, all of a sudden, like, it sticks in a different kind of way. And that's just a really amazing thing to sort of be able to do both. And so this is an encouragement. Continue. If you know any high school students, tell them to come to Bethlehem, and we'll teach them how to read old books by Freud, and so they can weave them into their children's stories. But then also for you, as you read Lewis, read his essays and then read his fiction, and you'll start to see those connections. You'll start to make some of those connections, and things will stick a little bit better.
Some time ago, I read, I was reading somebody, and they referred to the style of rhetoric that Lewis uses, that it's a particular style. I think they said there were something like 6 or 7, I don't remember how many different main styles of rhetoric. And Lewis's, his writing style followed a particular style of rhetoric. I think this sounds like a dissertation to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
that's right.
But anyway, that was no doubt, as you say, due to his familiarity with, with books and authors, that kind of thing. Yeah. Someone mentioned actually in the chat room a book. It's titled "The Art of Writing" by Corey. Looks like Lata. L-A-T-A.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis and the Art of Writing.
Yeah.
Is the title of the book. I don't know if are you familiar?
Yeah. I've read that one. It was good.
Yeah. Okay. So, other than addressing the headmistress's approach to teaching, does Lewis address the Freudian worldview in the rest of the book?
Yeah. So that's what he's doing with the Green Witch. In my chapter on the Marshwiggle in Live Like a Narnian, I go into more detail. I kind of give a quick snippet of it, but I describe more fully so Feuerbach, who was a predecessor to Freud, had the famous statement that if men were birds, God would have wings, something to that effect. Like if in other words, it's projection. Like we project, make God in our own image. And Feuerbach thought of his project as like almost the ultimate idolatry destruction, because sort of the Christian God was sort of the last idol, and that sort of idea of projection. And Freud did the same thing. Sort of our desire, we have these sort of repressed desires that work themselves out in really, really funky ways, and that's what the Green Witch is articulating. In fact, in Weight of Glory, he says this explicitly in the Weight of Glory, where he says, he's talking about this longing for something more, this desire for our far off country, the sort of ache and longing we feel for the argument from desire. And he says, "Do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am, but remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as for inducing them." There's two kinds of spells. "And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. Okay, that's what I've been talking about this whole time. He thought we've been under an enchantment of worldliness, both in terms of the comforts and also in terms of the philosophy, for 100 years, and we need to wake up. They're going to sleep. They're falling asleep, right, in the under the witch's influence. Almost our whole education, here's why Experiment House matters. Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice, that ache for something more. Almost all of our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found on this earth, which says, this is the only world. There's no other world. This is the real world, and I have use for you. You got to be busy and sad. And yet it is a remarkable thing that such philosophies of progress or creative evolution themselves bear reluctant witness to the truth that our real goal is elsewhere. And he goes on to talk about how even in these false philosophies, they can't help but like gesture towards the truth. Like, it's true that like God, like the connection between earthly fathers and divine fatherhood is right. It's just the projections going the wrong way. Freud says you're projecting your earthly father into the sky, and the Bible says no. God is projecting his fatherhood down to human size. Like, earthly fathers are to be pictures of our heavenly Father. And so the connection's right, it's the direction's wrong. As a father, I'm trying to be the smile of God to my kids. I want them to know what God is like because they've known me, because that's the direction it's supposed to go. God made me as a father to show the world, to show my kids what he's like. And so the connection that Freud and Feuerbach see is really there. They've just inverted it in order to sort of dethrone God and elevate man. That's the whole goal, right? To lay waste to Narnia and install the puppet king. That's the goal. And in fact, the interesting thing in the stories is that by rejecting that route, Brilliant says, I abhor that whenever he's in his right mind. I abhor that plan to go conquer some land. What ends up happening? He becomes the king. He does reign in Overland. He becomes king of Narnia, not by conquest and overthrowing it, but by, divine right, by Aslan's bequest. So there's really interesting things there happening with sort of the Freudian stuff. And there's a great book by a guy named Armand Nicolai, who was a professor at Harvard. And it's a class he taught at Harvard for years, comparing Freud and Lewis on a number of different things: love, sex, God, faith, science, etc. And it's just comparing biographically, comparing the two of them. It's a really, really great comparison between the two guys.
So maybe this is a good time to share about Lewis's concept of Bulverism.
Yeah.
Where Lewis, said that he used that as, the word for the idea that by explaining someone's motives, you basically have, explained their why they think a certain thing is true.
And therefore you've disproved it.
Yeah.
So Bulverism is if the example he uses is when Ezekiel Bulvers, this fictional made up guy, when he was like 5 years old, overheard his mother and dad talking about a math problem. And mom said, you just believe that because you're a man. And sort of the little light bulb went off over Bulver's head. And he went, huh. So you don't actually have to disprove the argument. All you have to do is explain why someone believes it, assume that it's disproved, and it's done. I think this is actually a fundamental thing. At some point, I'm going to write more on this because I see it everywhere. It's Bulverism as far as the eye can see on social media. Okay, because it's basically, why do you believe that? Because you're white middle class guy, right? Because you're a man. Because you're a woman, right? Why do you believe what you believe? And it's always sort of like explaining the motives, like you said. And therefore, if I can explain the motives, I don't actually have to answer your argument as an argument. But I can dismiss it with a wave of the hand. That's not reasoning. There's no reasoning. Christians can do this too. And we can be true. Like, why do some people walk away from the faith? Why do they become atheists? Because they want to sleep with their girlfriend. That's the motive. And there's a place for that in sort of pastoral care. Lewis is doing that with when he's talking about faith, and there'll come a moment when you really like Christianity not to be true, and so you're willing to, your emotions carry out a blitz, right? So that really does happen. The issue for Lewis is it doesn't tell you anything about whether or not atheism is true or false, right? Yes, you might believe in atheism because you want to sin, and atheism gives you permission to sin. But that doesn't tell you anything whatsoever about whether atheism is true or false. You have to actually look for that on different grounds. And that's where you decide the true or false question on its own. And then, having done so, then you can talk about, well, why, if this is true, would people not believe it? And that's an important pastoral question.
Yeah, and one example that I always think of is, sometimes people will say, well, you're just a Christian because your parents were Christian and you grew up around.
Exactly.
The answer is, well, that may be true, but that doesn't answer the question of whether Christianity is true or not.
Yes. Yeah. The fact that
I may be a Christian because of the influences that were on me that somebody else doesn't have, but that doesn't answer the question of whether Christianity is true or not.
Yeah, right. So whether or not my parents faithfully raised me to be a Christian doesn't tell you anything whatsoever about whether Jesus rose from the dead. Like those two facts have no bearing whatsoever on each other. If Jesus rose from the dead, it stands on its own, whether or not my parents raised me a certain way or not.
So David is asking, how does Bethlehem College choose the authors for?
Uh-oh. You there, Bill? I can see the question, so I'll keep answering it.
Okay, good. Go ahead, take it.
Yeah. How do we choose the authors for students to read? How should we choose what to read? I don't know how you should choose what to read. Up to you. Pick books that you like or that people that you like recommend. How we choose them is we
students to read. How should we? So, I think he's back now.
No, you were gone. I think
I was gone.
I think your screen froze up. I think
we lost you for a minute, Bill, but you're back.
Okay, you're back. So
okay.
So let me answer the quick question there about how we choose the book. So part of it is we look at what other, sort of the canon of the Western tradition, the great texts that have stood the test of time and that speak particularly to the reality, either in good ways or bad ways, and that have influenced the course of history. And we read those. And a lot of that has to do sometimes with preferences, honestly, like what books do I enjoy and like and think are really relevant as a professor, and other professors do the same. But we have sort of a basic kind of core list that we've compiled over the years that sort of is always a part of our curriculum. And then there's a wider circle that kind of comes and goes based on interest and availability and various and sundry other things like that. In terms of how you should choose what to read, like I said, find either pick books that you like by authors you like, or find trustworthy voices who are always recommending books. And if they say, hey, you should read this book, go read it. And once you find somebody who you really trust and who continually gives good book recommendations, man, that's just a treasure. Lewis is one of those guys, right? Like I go read books because Lewis says they're great. And I get curious, and I have other friends like that if they say this is worth reading, I go read it.
And what did Lewis say about reading old books?
You should read for every new book you read, you should read 2 old ones, 2 or 3 old ones.
Okay, so can you address the scene with King Caspian where he's made young again and not a ghost? What was Lewis saying with this scene?
Yeah, so Aslan's country is the true country, and so there, Caspian would be a ghost if he appeared in our world, but is solid in that world because that's his true home now. He's home. It's similar to the thing what Lewis does in Great Divorce, where the characters are ghosts. They're ghosts because they're dead, but they're only ghosts in relation to heaven, where the departed in heaven are solid spirits. They belong there. They're home, and so they're solid. And it's only in comparison to that the characters are ghosts. And then where he becomes young again is basically death works backwards. And how does it work backwards? Because the blood of Aslan, right? So there's a Jesus connection there the blood of Aslan makes death work backwards and restores Caspian to his health and to his life.
All right. So do you see any connection with Plato's allegory of the cave in this book?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think so. So Plato's allegory of the cave is that naturally we're all sort of, yes, I think that's absolutely right. That's in his mind. That, naturally human beings are sort of stuck in a cave and we're looking at shadows on a wall and we're mistaking the shadows for ultimate reality. And it's the shadows thrown by a fire outside the cave mouth, and there's sort of like a little puppet show happening, and we think that the shadows are real. And Plato's whole project as a philosopher was to go down. People are shackled there. They don't know that they're shackled, but they're shackled there, and they're fighting over who can see things the best. And he thinks the philosopher's job is to go down and try to rescue people basically from the shadows, unchain them, get them to turn around and go, wait, that's reality out there. There's a fire. And then when you go out, you see not only the fire, but the sun, which is even more glory. It's a fire in the sky. And that's what philosophy is, according to Plato. And I think that's definitely a part of the background here that Lewis is working with in Underland. This is the only world, the real world. And so that basically modernity, the modern philosophies, the Freud, Feuerbach kind of stuff, is basically trying to reshackle us in the cave and to convince us that this is all there is. And it's a debunking and a reducing down to material components, denying the soul, denying any kind of higher realities. And Lewis is a very Platonic thinker in that way. So yes, I think that's definitely part of it.
Okay, so the Green Witch is mentioned as being like the White Witch.
Yes.
In The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yes.
How do you think Lewis understands evil?
Yeah, good. So interestingly, so at the end there, one of the dwarves, I think it is, that says something like, let me find the line. Says, the lesson of it all is, Your Highness, that those northern witches always mean the same thing, but in every age they have a different plan for getting it. So there's the link, and there's a different plan. And the thing that occurred to me today was Jadis the White Witch enslaves people through external means, right? It's always winter, never Christmas. She's got a secret police. When Lewis is describing that, it's Gestapo-like. Like she's described in terms of the Gestapo with secret police that come, and there's spies everywhere. Even the trees are on her side. So she's got spies. She's hauling people away, but it's sort of this external tyranny. In this one, it's much more a enchantment that stupefies and dulls our senses. And so it's much more subtle. It's the strumming. It's the incense that sort of lulls us to sleep and makes us think this is the old world, so that we end up like the gnomes, busy but sad, and we don't know what we really were made for, right? That we silence that voice inside that says there must be more. So in both cases, the aim is the same: enslave, but there's different plans. There's different ways of accomplishing it. And so it's interesting that both of those at the middle of the 20th century were very, very live problems, right? The Nazis were real, and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe gestures towards Nazis or to the communists later would be another example of that sort of thing. I think I've told the story before about how under communism in Romania, people read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and they were like, this is about Romania, a white witch who has secret police and hauls people away to prison, and they never see him again. So there's that danger of kind of communism, Nazism, so forth at the tyranny level. The more subtle danger, though, is the more modern, lulling you to sleep. You don't even know it's working on you. The deeper it sets in on you, the less you feel it. You just feel like it's natural. You just soak up the modern toxic air, and you need to breathe some Narnian air. And so Lewis works both of those into these different stories as a way of trying to point out that evil is multifaceted. It comes in many varieties, but it's always trying to enslave, and it's always trying to turn you away from Jesus. Okay,
we have one more question, and then maybe you can say a word about next book.
Yeah.
I think The Horse and His Boy.
It is, yep.
In addition to remembering the signs being in the Word, what are some other ways that Christians can fight the enchantment of the modern world?
Yeah, that's great. So remembering the signs as being in the Word, prayer. I didn't mention this prayer, but obviously there's this bit about prayer where at the beginning of the book, when they're going to, hey, maybe we could get into Narnia, You mean like draw a circle on the ground and like say some funny words and like magic? And Yus is like, that's what I was thinking, but I actually think Aslan would hate that, which he would. He would hate that. And why? Because it might look like we think we can make him do things. It might be like that he's like a genie in a bottle, and he's not a genie. We can't make him do things, but we can ask him. And so prayer is a major way that we sort of focus our attention. So recognizing that your moods are going to change, and that you need to know that that's what that is, that moods affect what you believe, but not because it's rational, but because they're moods and they're powerful, they're strong. Your emotions and your imagination are powerful, and they're good. They're designed for your good, but they need to be reined in. They need to be governed. And so bringing the doctrines before your mind, praying, preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good apart from you. I have no good apart from you. Like that kind of prayer, preserve me, keep me, is a good prayer. You got to pray that sort of thing daily. Fellowship of other believers, absolutely important to have puddleglums in your life to help ground you. And then obedience. So one of the things that's really significant in the book is that the characters have to make the choice before they know the result. Like they don't get to sort of wait and see how things play out. Mm-hmm. They're not told what's going to happen. This happens again and again in Narnia. And Lewis was really big on this, is the choice. It's risky. Like it's risky. You don't know what's going to happen. What if I open that door? What's going to go? You don't know. Right. And you have to take the risk. You have to take the leap. It's not an irrational leap, a blind leap. It's a reasonable one. There are good reasons to believe that God exists. The argument from reason, the argument from morality, the argument from desire. All of these are good reasons. The resurrection of Jesus and the historical evidence, all kinds of good reasons. At the end of the day, you have to take the leap and believe and obey and trust. And if you refuse to do that and you say, I'm not going to believe until I have absolute certainty that I know what's going to happen and how all this plays out. I'm not going to obey until I know that I know that I know that I know that I know what the truth is. Then you won't get there. That's not the way. It's not a bargain with God. You don't get to bargain with him that way. Tell me how it's all going to play out and then I'll follow you. No. It's here's the signs. Here's what I've given you to guide you. Obey it and I'll see to the outcome. And this is the other important thing there is that there's a moment where when Brilliant's still under the enchantment and he says, how did you guys get here? Well, there was lettering that said under me. And so we thought it was instructions that we were supposed to go under it. And he laughs at them and says, how stupid do you have to be? That's just a larger thing. Didn't have any message for you in that. And Puddleglum, of course, says there are no accidents. There are no accidents. Aslan was there when that whole statement was written all those millennia ago. Aslan was there and he had that in mind. He had our situation in mind when that got written. He's Lord of everything. He's sovereign. He governs it all. So don't you believe for a minute that there are accidents, Jill. Don't you believe that? And that's you need a Puddleglum like that. You need people like that in your life who are going to help continually point you that way.
So I said last question, but I actually have a question that I had to ask you earlier. Knowing that you're very familiar with Jonathan Edwards, how would you compare and contrast Lewis's view of the relationship of faith and reason and desire with Edwards?
Yeah, I've had a little, pet project at some point. I tuck stuff away. I don't know if I'll ever do anything with it. About comparing and contrasting Lewis and Edwards, who are two of my heroes, because I find them to agree on so many different things. I'll be reading something in Edwards and I'll be like, that sounds like Lewis. And I'll be reading something in Lewis, that sounds like Edwards. And on this question, I think that they're actually fairly well aligned. Edwards had a high view of reason as a minister and a servant, governed by the word. The word is the supreme, but under the word, God's given you a brain and reason, and it needs to be guided and it needs to be humble and it can't set itself up as God, but it's a good thing. And that's a very similar way to the way Lewis thinks about faith and reason or the scriptures and reason. As well. And so there's a lot of overlap there on a whole host of issues. And so, someday maybe I'll put something together about Lewis and Edwards. So for our next time, you want to do next time?
Horse and His Boy. Yeah.
Horse and His Boy. I've said Horse and His Boy is my favorite of the Narnian Chronicles. Silver Chair actually may have just temporarily, at least, supplanted it because I really was edified by this last time through. Horse and His Boy, of course, is a story that gets alluded to here. It's the story that they listen to when they first get to Cair Paravel in Narnia, Jill and Eustace, and they hear the story of Shasta and Erebus, called The Horse and His Boy. And so he teased it up like a little teaser there. And of course, it's a story of Shasta, who's a Colorman boy, or he's not, he's in Colorman, and about how he and a horse escape to Narnia in the north. So having gone east, now having gone north, we're going to go south to Colorman and see what lessons Narnia has for us about the Christian life there.
Okay, well, we look forward to that. I have to say, in agreement with you, that I was moved by the silver chair, especially there at the end where Aslan, when Prince Caspian is dead, and Aslan has a thorn, put in to his paw so that blood goes down into the water and raises up Prince Caspian.
Yeah.
And
baptism.
One of the moving parts of it was that at the point where everyone's weeping when they see Prince Caspian, dead and deteriorating, and even Aslan weeps.
Yes, right. Yeah, so it's Lazarus, right? This is the Lazarus moment. I preached at Easter for our church, and preached on Lazarus and how the love of Jesus waits, the love of Jesus weeps, and the love of Jesus raises the dead. And so Lewis is definitely echoing that story in Silver Chair.
Okay, so we look forward to next month, and so we encourage everybody to read The Horse and His Boy, and we'll see you next time. Tell your friends.